Hey everybody, Dr. Gianmichael Salvato here, the Holistic Mystic, and welcome to another installment of the Brew. You know, if you've been one of those folks who's been asking us for more programming on folk magic, and you're curious about this incredible tradition that has its roots in the eastern coast of the Americas, then I've got some great news for you. We are going to have a special guest on this installment of the Brew that we've been working on getting live on here for a couple weeks now, and it is actually going to be special for a number of reasons, not the least of which is his incredible story and the gifts that he brings to the program. So we'll talk about that when we come back. And welcome back. As I said, our guest, Adam Darqly, grew up in the foothills of the Appalachians, where he was exposed early on to a number of the workers and practitioners of folk magic. 10 years ago, he began to delve deeper into sorcery and herbalism, shamanic practices, and ecstatic trance states, and healing with plant and mineral medicine. And, you know, today he and his husband run an occult business. And we are so fortunate to have him on this week's installments of the Brew. Adam, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Appreciate it. It's a pleasure.
And I'm going to go ahead and pull up our comments. So if you're watching this, folks, if you're watching live and you have questions, be sure to ask them. If you're watching on the replay, go ahead and post the questions. And if I happen to see that and notice that you've got a question for Adam, I'll make sure that we get the question to him so that you guys can continue this conversation going forward. We are being broadcast live now on Facebook and simulcast on YouTube. So if you enjoy this program, you find value here, we appreciate you liking and subscribing, and make sure that you share this so that we can get the word out there about the great work that Adam and his husband are doing. So let's dive in and tell me a little bit about your experience, about what led you to the path that you're on right now.
Of course, yeah. So I basically I grew up in like Southwest Tennessee and like outside of McNairy County. Like I said, like in the foothills, just basically like red dirt dunes and a whole lot of snakes and a whole bunch of other crazy stuff. But I grew up like a Southern Baptist / Methodist / Catholic. So I obviously had a whole lot of like Christianity as far as mythos and all that stuff going on. But for me personally, at some point around like 8, 10, I just knew it wasn't for me. I didn't know what that was, but I knew I didn't fit there. I just, I actually, delved a little in Buddhism and a little in a few other things until I got about 19, 20. It's been about 10 years or so ago. I actually met my husband. He'd been working in magic and sorcery. He was a rabbi, a minister, and now he's a ceremonial sorcerer. And he was one of my biggest inspirations for really helping me to step onto my path. He wasn't as much as the person that I began to learn shamanic works and practices from, but he was more so the enabler, I guess, in a good way. And so I essentially just started learning about herbal remedies and plant medicines and stuff. I'd grown up around different grandmothers and grandfathers who work with plants, but I never had that same passion until that point on. I started learning healing modalities as far as like the manipulation of energy, actually being able to trace certain energies and diagnosing through like the spine and through the energy meridians and all that kind of stuff. Into a blending of energy and plant medicine alike. And then it wasn't until about 2 years after that I actually started learning some forms of hoodoo and of conjure and of folk magic, from really basic resources and books. And then not long after that I actually began to find mentors, or more so they found me. And they would just keep coming. And I had people from everywhere from my age to people. I have a friend who's still a mentor. She lives in the UK and she's like 70. And she's been a long-standing person that's been a huge motivator and a huge inspiration in that way. And I would say certainly, I didn't learn until probably about a year or two ago that I had ancestors that were healers. I had ancestors that were witches, that were in the Appalachians. They were mostly, it was my grandmothers and my great grandmothers on both sides. I had a grandmother who, Grandma Hattie Mae, or great grandma Hattie Mae, people would trade her everything from like cakes to whiskey and booze and all kinds of stuff just to come and get her, her healing medicines. Specifically things like poke and all that kind of stuff, sassafras, of course, to cleanse the blood and to get things going, to get that heat going in the body and all that kind of stuff. And it's just crazy that I never knew about that. I actually have a great aunt. When I was a kid, they always told me she was a witch, like a poisoner. But I actually learned that she was more of a village healer at some point. And so it's all really strange, but it's beautiful to know about, and it's certainly helped influence my work. So.
Well, let's talk about something you just said, because I know that a number of folks watching may not even be familiar or understand what the difference is between folk magic and hoodoo and witchcraft. And in the culture, while we might look at it ourselves and say, well, those folks who are practitioners are practicing the craft. They're using the craft for good. But it's still the craft. That's not the way that it's looked at in the Appalachians. And so let's talk a little bit about that, like the difference between a granny and and a witch, and how that word would be used. I know in the Italian tradition, while we now can say, oh yeah, we were strega, that was not a word that I grew up hearing ever, unless it was pejorative, like, oh, there's that fatucchiera over there, there's that strega over there. In our tradition, you just didn't refer to what you were doing as witchcraft. In Italian, we would say fallo santucci. We're doing a little holy thing, and that was it. There wasn't really a name. But talk about the Appalachian tradition and how those distinctions exist in that culture.
Yeah, and I would say, to begin with, really, as far as my understanding of folk magic, it's typically the magic that you find in the villages and the outlying areas where it may be not even as much civilized, where people don't really have as much access or to resources. They may be illiterate, or they may have learned from word of mouth. I find the difference being, folk magic being somewhat of a more general, whereas say like hoodoo is, it's obviously it stems from something. It's its own sort of body and practice of knowledge. And I would say, as far as the difference between what, like we would consider like a granny witch, or a granny and a witch would be, to me, at least, the grannies are sort of the forebears of the family. They carry the knowledge of the medicine, the knowledge of the omens, as far as, planting by the signs and by the moon, and which plants to use for what different things, superstition. Teaching the grandchildren, certain things like, when you drive by a graveyard at night or walk by, you hold your breath, because you don't want to be possessed or to have a spirit follow you home. All those little things. I would say the granny is, very much in older cultures where the mother or the grandmother was the matriarch, where she was almost like the culmination of the power and the blood of the family. And that, as she passed, that moved on. But she is like the mentor and the teacher and the storyteller and the visionary. And as far as Appalachia would go, she's like almost like the family high priestess, I guess would be the best word to put it. And then witch is really general. I feel like, it could almost be, could be used in a number of ways, just like, Peller or Cunning Man or anything like that. I feel like it more so targets the actual tradition or belief system in and of itself. Like in hoodoo, we have Conjure Man or root worker and that kind of thing, which, they could share some of the same specialties or bodies of knowledge or practices, but they have their own specializations and bodies of knowledge and influence and spirits.
Right,
sure.
Right. Yeah, I know that a lot of when we started to see a lot of questions coming from folks about that distinction, where they really kind of got it. I've been talking about it for about 10 years, since the first book I did on the Italian folk magic practices, which is now actually out of print. But when Sabrina the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina came on, all of a sudden people were like, oh, so the folk magic tradition you're doing is like the girl on Sabrina whose grandmother said she had the gift of sight, but everybody was kind of nervous around witches, and yet and yet the other perspective is that there were some folks in our tradition who weren't afraid to embrace that title and say, yeah, if you want to call me a witch, call me a witch. So now tell us a little bit about the actual work that you do. What are some of the things that you bring to society? And I know you're in Alabama right now, but you actually there are people that are watching this right now. I'm hearing this crazy. Are you hearing that crazy sound in the back?
Crackling almost.
Yeah.
The sound.
Yeah.
I didn't know if that was me or you.
No, there's nothing going on here, and it's not showing up on the little microphone things on your end. I think it's just Facebook.
This mountain spirits.
Yeah, I think so. Then they're eating. It's probably lunchtime. So tell me a little bit though about like the services. I know there are people who are watching. I was going to say who are watching from Canada, and you've actually provided services to them. So tell us a little bit about your practice itself.
I would say as far as what people typically seek me out for, it seems to be road opening, love work, and money work. For whatever reason, I'm not sure if that happens to be like a specialty of mine, because I typically, like, I find like whatever the people, for the most part, if somebody pays me for a service, especially if I feel like it's justified, for the most part, I typically will do it. But yeah, people seek me out for any number of things, specifically things like I make like certain protection charms and stuff, consecrated to certain saints or certain powers. I make spirit bottles, for love, for money. Like specifically ones I work with Saint Cyprian of Antioch. So I make a lot of amulets and spirit bottles for my students and people that I work for or work with. I make a whole lot of oils. I know right now with this newest May release, we have like 53 oils. I never thought it would have ever gotten to that point. But as well as the lamp you can see right to my side, I make a lot of different lamps for my clients and customers, just to as sort of like spirit houses, like an altar of its own kind of. I do everything from like playing card magic to obviously root work, actually working either medicinally in spirit or magically with the plants. I make like a whole lot of hanging charms with like hag stones. That's actually like an El Pollo Negro feather with some boa constrictor vertebra and a hag stone. So I do, I guess, a little bit of everything for the most part. I'll really do, for the most part, if the client pays for it, especially if I've done a reading, like I said, if it's justified, then I'll do it. I'm happy to help. So.
Well, I've got your web address on Facebook on the screen right now, and so another thing I would love for you to do is, I've been watching some of the that chomping is, whoever the spirits are that are eating, mute your microphone. Tell us a little bit about some of the oils that you make and some of the specific oils, because I've been really impressed having worked in that area of magic for a long time. Seeing some of the stuff that you've done, and you actually show the what we would call social proof. You actually show the making of those oils themselves on your page, which I really appreciate. It lets people know that you're the real deal.
Yeah. And so, I've made oils in the past, medicinally, magically, but something happened last August, September, specifically working with Saint Cyprian, where he showed me, like, he basically was like, you've been doing it wrong the whole time, and I'm just telling you now. But he shared with me that it's the materia, it's the consecration, but most importantly, it's the conjuration of the actual spirits that I feel like is so missing out of Conjure. I feel like that's the most important part, because anybody can throw herbs and olive oil, shake it and pray over it and say, oh, well, this is a holy anointing oil. And with every right, I'm sure it is. I'm sure it'll work amazingly. I feel like Cyprian shared with me that when you're creating an oil, you're creating a vessel, you're creating a body, and very much so it is it's a container spell. It's a spirit house of sort. And so, you have animal, plant, human, and stone parts. And I feel like the biggest thing with that he shared with me is, even beyond planetary, moon phase, all that kind of stuff, you're giving guts and body and fuel and life to those spirits. And so even like the oil of Saint Cyprian, like obviously owl plays like a huge role. I have everything in there from El Pollo Negro feathers to black cat bone to serpent to tarantula molts. And all those spirits amalgamate and merge as one. They become like one solid force, a force to be reckoned with, quite literally, to be put to use and work. Not only do they serve to be anointed, on yourself in candles and baths, but they also serve as almost like mini altars, like mini spirit houses. And I feel like they're very talismanic in that aspect, where I'm calling upon the star powers, the moon, calling upon planetary powers, spirits of the land here, the dead, all of that coming together as one. I feel like is something that I've never done. And the thing with these oils is, like, I don't usually go from a formulary. The spirits of the specific oil approach me usually a few weeks or a month before I've even created them. And they start sharing and showing me not only what to put in it, but how to make it. Each oil is consecrated and made sometimes vastly different in ways that I've never worked. But it's a new practice to me still. It's a way I'm still coming into, but it's like I said, it's really strange in how it just, I got like almost like a download from spirit, and every oil is very individual in and of itself, from the actual spirits. Like it's quite revelatory, I guess is what you would say, where they're literally like, this is how I want it. You make it like this, and then once it's done, once it's ready, I just feel like a sigh of relief, like that spirit, like their message really came through and it's alive. So whenever I say, I'll announce like, this oil will be consecrated, I'll be like, it's alive, because that's what I feel. It's very Frankensteinian, where you're literally, you're resurrecting or bringing something to life in essence.
And that's really the difference between working with an essential oil or working or creating an essential oil, an essence of the plant magic, and actual conjuration. I think you said it really well, because it becomes a tabernacle, an altar, a vessel for something that goes well beyond just the essence of the plant. And we can work with the essence of plants and get really some great results. But the results are nothing like when you're actually working with an embodiment of the magical entities themselves. And I think that comes across even in your videos. So I didn't realize that was something you've only, that's pretty amazing that it's something you've only been doing recently, because I imagine from watching your videos that you had been studying that since the time you were a child, because it took me at least 20 years before I was even ready for that kind of a concept. Guys, if you're watching and you've got some questions, or you would like to ask of Adam, or ask of the chomping spirits in the background, go ahead and put them in the comments, and we'll put them up on the screen. I know we've got Penny watching, and I would imagine that we've got Azazel and Sinaru watching as well. But I'm not seeing any comments. Like I said, Facebook's been really acting up and acting crazy. Are there anything else that, since we don't have a lot of, somebody's messaging me that they're having problems commenting on Facebook. So if you're watching and you're having issues with getting your comments to go through, I'm going to go ahead and put this comment up from Penny, who says, thank you for sharing. So if you're watching and you're having issues with your comments, go ahead and put them in the comments whenever Facebook starts working again, and we will, or on YouTube, we'll make sure that that I get them to Adam. Hey, here's Azazel saying he loves your work, and hello to you guys up in Canada. But is there anything that you want to share, before we kind of wind things up? Because if there's not a lot of guests, I don't want to keep you, I don't want to keep you here for too long. But anything else about your work, anything that's coming up for you and your husband, let us know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I never felt that I had I've taught people on and off over the years, but I never felt like I had the true confidence, and I still didn't until my own spirits were like, well, it's either now or never. And so I've most recently started taking a dive to not only teach classes from what I know, from what my mentors and spirits have taught me, but I've started to, in creating classes like video and otherwise, but I've actually started to take on mentorships. It's usually 4 students at a time for like 3 to 6 month periods. But I've started to take on students, and I'm creating more and more classes. I have one that's a very like bare bones foundational class that I call, Conjure 101. It teaches, some history and origins and beliefs and methods and practices and all that kind of stuff. But now I will actually have some up and coming video classes. I'm going to be creating a class on magical lamps, their creation, their use, all that kind of stuff, and future classes. I'm expanding on that original class, probably at least on 5 to 10 different ways, as well as, like I said, actually taking on students and mentoring. I'm actually full up right now, but in August I'll be taking on more students as well. So that's just like another thing that I've really been dipping my toe in to see, if I'm quite ready. And it's one of those things that you don't know until you know, and then when you're teaching, you're like, oh, okay, all this information is still up there, so that's good. I'm not quite senile or anything yet, so.
Right on.
But yeah, I'm having a blast teaching people, and I'm always offering new magical services. I currently read playing cards and mediumship for clients and people. Let's see, I always, like I said, usually the first day or week of every month, I have monthly conjure boxes, new oils, baths, incense, all that kind of stuff. As you know, I just dropped the May release a week or so ago. It contains all kinds of 3 specific really badass oils. It's the oil of Chiron, the oil of revolution, and there's another one, but it's slipping my mind. I also have the lover's dust, which is a powerful powder to lay as like a sachet powder, otherwise to basically get you laid. It's got animal, plant, and otherwise materia that works very fast, as well as a new, I have about 10 to 12 talismans that I typically keep on hand or craft, but I have one that I just revealed. It's called the Charm of Cunning. It actually has, like a squirrel paw, and fur from, or hair from like a squirrel's tail. It's got master root, herbs and powders and dirts of vision, of mastery, and it's essentially a talisman of personal resilience and resourcefulness, with an element of actually heightening and extending one's own power, as well as clarity and vision and all that kind of stuff. So it's sort of like an all-in-one jack of all trades kind of thing. So
right on.
Yeah,
well,
I'm just having a blast.
I was going to say too that the way that people can get in touch with you for all of those things, and if they have any other questions and they want to ask you directly, guys, that is Adam's Facebook page on the bottom of your screen. So get in touch with him there. And I want to thank you especially for being on today's show. We tried a couple weeks ago and had technical difficulties. And for those that are watching who don't know, today's show is actually the last episode of the Brew. But don't be depressed, don't be upset. It's just the last episode of the Brew. In a couple weeks, in the first week in June, I believe on Tuesdays, we're going to be starting a new page, a new chapter in the journey, and that chapter is going to be focused on the folk magic traditions, a little bit less of the sort of traditional witchcraft and Wicca and Stregaria and all of that, and more focused on particularly the Italian tradition, the stregoneria, or we'll see if this happens on Facebook like it does on YouTube. I know people are watching who get crazy when they hear me say stregoneria, and because that's mispronouncing the word in Italian. The real word in Italian is stregoneria, and we don't usually do that because on YouTube, whenever I say that in a predominantly English speaking video, YouTube's AI will close caption that as stray gonorrhea. So this is not what we're trying to say here. So I decided a couple years ago that I was just going to say stregoneria, and I would rather have people try and correct me and say that's not how you pronounce it. That's okay, because at least when I say it that way, it gets put on the closed captions correctly. Yeah. So that new show will be starting in June, and I couldn't think of a better way. Ellen, it's great to see you. I couldn't think of a better way to wrap up an incredible 4 seasons of the Brew with some amazing special guests along the way than by having our friend Adam on talking about folk magic. And I know that some of you that are watching right now, I just could feel it. That was really pushing all of your buttons and checking off the boxes, because this may be something that you're really interested in. And now you know that Adam's teaching these classes, so get in touch with him, and stay tuned at the same on the same Facebook group that we hosted, the Brew. We will be switching things over. I can't change the name of the group until the 25th, and then we'll go ahead and change the name over. But if you're in the group, you're already in the group. And let's see, another message here from Adrian. You guys are amazing. So glad I caught you here as well. I know that Adrian was watching, especially just to hear your accent.
Yeah.
And we've got Valentia, who says looking forward to the new chapter. I definitely don't want to miss it. And we will, if you would be willing to do it, we'll definitely have you on again in the new show. Yeah. Maybe bring your husband along. That would be awesome. So thank you for being here, and thank those of you for watching, and for whatever the issue is. I'm gonna blow up my phone. Whatever the issue is with that noise in the background, maybe the spirits wanted to say goodbye to. Thanks, everybody. We'll look forward to talking to you soon.